The new summer edition of the Price Predict Index is a great way to find out what's really going on in real estate markets across Australia. And I do emphasise what's really going on as opposed to the general theme from mainstream media that prices are falling everywhere. We know that's not true because this report, the Price Predictor Index, the latest summer 2019 edition, is based on a survey of every town and suburb in Australia, looking at sales activity and what's happening with prices. So we know that there are many strong growth markets around Australia, as well as those that are in decline in Sydney and in some parts of the Melbourne market. So many highlights in this edition, the summer 2019 edition of the Price Predictor Index. One of those highlights that we, on page 9 of the report, we highlight in a summary form the main findings of our research for this report. And the first point is that regional Australia is leading on growth. Most of the strong growth markets in Australia, not all of them, but most of them are in the regions outside the capital cities. Regional Victoria, we think, is the strongest market. Regional Tasmania is also very strong. There are plenty of growth locations in regional New South Wales as well, not as strong as Victoria, but nevertheless very, very solid. And increasingly we're seeing rising markets popping up in regional Queensland and elsewhere. Another theme that we highlight in the Price Predictor Index is that the cheaper areas are dominating the nation. Now, that's in addition to what I've just said about the regional areas. One of the reasons why regional Victoria is doing so well is buyers out of Melbourne are targeting regional cities and towns for their higher level of affordability. But we're also seeing this factor pop up within the capital cities. In Melbourne, for example, prices are down sharply in the top end suburbs, the millionaire suburbs, but in the outer ring areas where first home buyers and others on a budget are very active still, prices are still rising and strongly in some parts of outer ring Melbourne. It's also true in Sydney, where prices are holding up best in the cheaper areas where the first home buyers remain very active. Now, our national top 50 list of supercharged suburbs highlighted in this report, there are only 3 locations with median prices above 880,000. 34 of the 50, the top 50 supercharged suburbs that we identify with this research, 34 of the 50 have median prices below 500,000, and 26 of those 50 are regional locations. Now, just to further emphasise that point of the cheaper areas providing the best growth prospects at the moment, in Melbourne, the local government area of Melton, that's in the far western outskirts of the Melbourne metropolitan area, most Melton suburbs have experienced growth in median prices in the last 12 months above 20%. As an extension of the theme, the number one market that we have found in our research in terms of the number of suburbs with rising demand is Adelaide. And again, this is a city which is highlighted by its affordability, its value for money compared to Melbourne and Sydney in particular. Regional New South Wales is the next strongest jurisdiction after Adelaide in terms of the number of locations with rising demand. Regional Victoria and Perth are also feature prominently, as does regional Queensland, followed by Brisbane. And it won't surprise you to learn that we can find very few growth markets in terms of rising demand in either Sydney or Melbourne. We do highlight various aspects of the Sydney market. Media tends to give us a very blanket statement. Prices are plummeting or nosediving, as they like to use very dramatic language in Sydney. But there are lots of different scenarios playing out within the city of Sydney. We certainly do highlight those markets that we regard as the weakest in Sydney, the decline markets, and the ones we classify as danger markets. But you also note an interesting trend, and that is that in many locations, the apartment market is outperforming the housing market. We've identified numerous suburbs where the median house price in that suburb is down significantly, but the median apartment price in the same suburb is up. And suburbs of Sydney that have that phenomenon going on include Petersham, North Ryde, Lindfield, Rose Bay, Roseville, Rozelle, Ryde, Sans Souci, Seaforth, St Ives, St Leonards, Sylvania, Turramurra, Wiley Park and Willoughby, amongst others. So that's an interesting side story to what's going on in Sydney, that apartments generally, in terms of pricing, are doing much better than houses. And that we have numerous suburbs, as I've just pointed out, where prices are rising against the trend of houses in the same suburbs, which are falling. Generally, we think as a result of this location by location research covering the whole of Australia, that the key story isn't so much downturn, which is very much a Sydney story, but we see recovery as a more important story for real estate consumers, because around Australia we're seeing markets that have been stuck in stagnation, not going up or down, or have been previously in downturn, are now moving into some sort of growth or recovery mode. I think that's very true of Perth, it's true of Brisbane. We're seeing it in various parts of regional Australia, regional Queensland markets, and also regional Western Australia and regional South Australia markets, which have been impacted adversely by the previous downturn in the resources sector, are now moving into recovery modes. And there are a number of significant fight back stories, such as the towns of Victoria's Latrobe Valley. We also highlight the discrepancies in the various data telling us what's happening supposedly with prices in the major cities. And we use Melbourne as an example of that. What's really happening with Melbourne prices, because media keeps telling us Melbourne house prices are down 8 or 9%, quoting one particular source, but then there are numerous other sources which contradict those figures. For example, the nation's largest real estate website, realestate.com.au, tells us that Melbourne house prices on average are down about 2% in annual terms, and SQM Research and the Australian Bureau of Statistics has similar figures. Whereas the Real Estate Institute of Victoria claims that on average, Melbourne house prices actually rose a little bit, 1.4% is their figure for 2018. So what's really happening? Whose figures are right? It's very hard for consumers to know, but we have conducted a suburb by suburb survey of Melbourne, and we think that the figures claiming declines overall about 2 to 3% are likely to be the most accurate. What we have found is that the top end suburbs, prices have fallen a lot, generally speaking. The middle market, prices are holding up pretty well. Some are down a little, some suburbs are up a little. And in the outer ring areas, the cheaper areas, prices are still rising strongly. So by the time you average out all those different scenarios, what you come up with, according to our suburb by suburb analysis, is the finding that we think those sources, those major sources that claim Melbourne prices overall for houses are down 2 or 3%, are the ones most likely to be accurate. So all that and a whole lot more in the new summer 2019 edition of the Price Predictor Index. We have, it's a very big report, almost 100 pages, where we have charts, tables, suburb by suburb, where we rank the various suburbs according to whether demand is rising or plateauing or falling. We have chapters on all the capital cities and all the major regional markets as well. It's a report worth getting. We think it's a unique report in the landscape of Australian residential real estate research. So get yourself a copy and read it and be better informed about what's going on, what's really going on in Australian markets than those that rely on mainstream media. Those are the people who have their heads full of misinformation based on media sound bites and misleading headlines. Talk to you again soon. Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au signing off.